Hey, welcome to the briefing. What I'm going to cover with you today is this. The cold chain broke. First, find out what was actually exposed. The trailer is here. The cold chain failure is confirmed. What is not confirmed is what the failure actually touched. That distinction is where this whole briefing sits, because you can know something went wrong and still not know enough to decide what happens next. The dock wants an answer, inventory wants an answer, transportation wants an answer, and customer operations wants an answer. Everybody wants the situation converted into yes or no, receive it or reject it, release it or hold it, move it or stop it. But sometimes the most important thing you can recognize is that the decision cannot responsibly be reduced to yes or no yet. The failure may be confirmed while the scope of the failure remains unclear, and if that scope can change the correct decision, then the missing variable matters more than the pressure to keep moving. A confirmed failure does not automatically define its scope. On August 20th, France's official Rappel Conso system published a recall involving smoked salmon and trout products after a temperature control failure during transportation. The important detail for us is not simply that there was a cold chain failure. The official notice identified the affected scope as one pallet containing 18 packages and distinguished that pallet from the rest of the lot. Think about what that means operationally. The temperature problem was real, the risk was real, and the recall was real. But the event did not automatically mean every unit connected to the broader lot experienced the same condition. Somebody had to understand what the failure actually reached. And that is the decision problem I want to work through with you, because this kind of pressure shows up anywhere you have enough evidence to know something is wrong, but not enough evidence to know the correct size, location, or consequence of the response. For this briefing, stay with me at the receiving dock. You are the receiving supervisor at a refrigerated distribution center. You have chilled product arriving during a busy inbound window. Your crew is ready. Another appointment is scheduled behind this trailer. Inventory is expecting product to become available, and customer demand is already sitting downstream waiting for receiving to do what receiving normally does. The objective is straightforward: receive the product correctly, protect product condition, maintain accurate inventory status, keep the inbound operation moving, and do not allow schedule pressure to push questionable product farther into the system before you understand what you actually have. Then the trailer arrives, and a temperature control exception is identified in the transportation record. This is no longer a normal inbound load. Now, I am not claiming this illustrative receiving scenario is what happened in the French recall. Based on what is publicly known, we know a transportation temperature failure occurred. The official recall identified a limited, affected scope, and the notice distinguished that pallet from the rest of the lot. The internal conversations, trailer conditions, records reviewed, and exact decision process are not publicly established, so we are not going to invent them. We are going to use the verified condition to put a receiving supervisor into a realistic decision. The trailer is at your door, the clock is moving, another truck is coming, inventory wants the receipt, and customer orders may depend on the product. Your first instinct may be immediate containment. Stop everything, do not receive anything from the trailer, and treat the whole load as potentially affected until the approved process tells you otherwise. I understand that response because it is trying to keep questionable product from moving deeper into the operation. The other instinct is to keep receiving while the issue is reviewed. The trailer is here, most of the product appears normal, the dock is backing up, and the rest of the schedule still exists. That response is trying to protect flow, capacity, customer demand, and the next appointment. Neither person has to be careless for this problem to form. Responsible people can protect different parts of the same objective and still make a weak decision if they answer a question the operation cannot answer yet. The question is not whether the cold chain failure happened. It did. The critical question is what product was actually exposed to the condition. That is the missing variable, and it can completely change the next move. If the affected scope is narrow, treating the entire load as though every pallet experienced the same condition can create unnecessary disruption. Usable product may remain unavailable, inventory gets constrained, customer orders lose supply, and the operation can build a broad recovery effort around a much smaller confirmed problem. If the affected scope is broader than the team assumes, continuing to receive and release product creates the opposite problem. Questionable product moves into inventory. The system begins showing it as available, orders may allocate against it, fulfillment may pick it, and another facility or customer may receive it. The uncertainty does not stay at the receiving door. It starts traveling with the freight. That is where in-depth analysis matters. In-depth analysis is used when the action path reaches a point where a critical missing variable can make the next decision irresponsible. You are not stopping because uncertainty is uncomfortable or because you want more time. You are stopping because the missing information can materially change the correct move. And I want to separate something here. People hear the word analysis and sometimes think we are about to spend 3 days discussing one pallet. We are not. You do not need perfect certainty before every operating decision. If that were the standard, logistics would stop by lunch. Carriers give estimates, arrival times change, inventory records get corrected, appointments shift, equipment changes, and labor changes. Some uncertainty belongs to the operating environment, but there is a difference between normal uncertainty and an unknown that can reverse the decision. That is the line you have to recognize. Go back to our receiving supervisor. The temperature exception is confirmed, so that is not the unknown. The supervisor knows something happened and knows the issue may affect whether the product can continue through the normal receiving and release path. What they do not know yet is the scope. Was the condition isolated to one pallet, several pallets, a particular area of the trailer, or something broader? What are the transportation records, product identification, and approved food safety or quality review establish? The supervisor should not invent those answers. They are not being asked to become a food scientist because the trailer showed up on their shift, determine microbiological risk by looking at a box, or create a temperature threshold from memory. Their leadership responsibility sits at a different level. Recognize that the operating decision has reached a point where the current read is insufficient. Protect the product and the operation while the critical variable is resolved through the approved process. Then make the next move from a better read. And that sounds easy when I slow it down. It is harder when the dock is live. A driver is waiting, the refrigerated trailer is occupying a door, another carrier is approaching its appointment, inventory wants status, customer operations is watching orders, and transportation wants the equipment cleared. Every additional minute creates another reason to turn uncertainty into a conclusion. Somebody says, it looks isolated. Okay. What supports that? Somebody says the rest should be fine. Maybe. What evidence supports it? Somebody else says we cannot trust anything on that trailer. That may become the correct determination. What establishes that scope? Pressure can make an assumption sound like a fact when enough people repeat it. 5 confident guesses are still just a group project. The operation does not become more informed because the sentence gets more confident. That is the leadership trap. Urgency starts replacing the missing variable. The team wants a decision, so somebody produces one, and now you are building an operating plan on top of an incomplete read. Here is what that decision looks like once you stop pretending it is reasonable. The dock clock is wearing a lab coat, the customer forecast has grabbed a thermometer, and the pallet jack has somehow been promoted to quality because everybody wants the door back. Funny picture, real consequence. None of those things can tell you what product was actually exposed. Suppose the supervisor assumes the issue is narrow. Most of the load continues through receiving, inventory becomes available, the trailer clears the door, and from a dock efficiency standpoint, things look like they are recovering. Then the qualified review establishes that the exposure was broader than the team assumed. Now, the questionable product is not sitting in one controlled place. Some may be in inventory, allocated, staged, or already entering another movement. Inventory statuses and customer commitments have to change, and people farther downstream are now carrying a problem that started at receiving. What began as a temperature exception becomes a traceability, inventory, fulfillment, and customer problem. The first decision did not remove the uncertainty, it distributed it. Now take the other extreme. The supervisor holds the entire load under the approved exception process. That may be exactly what the process requires while the condition is evaluated, and I am not telling you otherwise. But if the qualified determination later establishes a much smaller affected scope, usable inventory may have been held longer than necessary, customer orders delayed, replacement product requested, transportation capacity consumed, and warehouse space tied up. The organization built a broad recovery effort around a narrow failure. Containment is not the problem. The problem is when the size of the response becomes disconnected from what is known and what the approved process requires. You can underreact to an unclear condition, and you can overreact to one. That is why the French recall is useful. The public notice did not stop at saying a transportation temperature failure occurred. It identified scope: 1 pallet, 18 packages, not the entire lot. The failure was real without being universal. That distinction matters because operational mistakes happen when people treat confirmation of the problem as confirmation of every conclusion that follows from it. You can confirm a trailer temperature issue without knowing every unit affected. You can confirm an inventory discrepancy without knowing every order affected, or a system transaction failure without knowing every record is wrong. The visible failure tells you something. The question is whether it tells you enough to make the next decision, and this is where I want to sharpen the wording. The problem is the temperature exception. No, that is too broad. The temperature exception is where the problem became visible. The decision failure happens if the leader converts that exception into a release, rejection, or disposition decision without understanding the variable that controls the scope. That is also why in-depth analysis is not just get more information. You could gather 200 facts about the trailer and still miss the one fact that changes the move. Who loaded it, what door it is in, what time the driver arrived, and tomorrow's inbound volume may matter somewhere, but they are not necessarily the variable controlling this decision. The critical variable is affected scope. Pull what changes the decision, not information for comfort, and not information merely because it is easy to obtain. For United States operations, FDA guidance gives us a useful separate reference point. When there is an indication of a possible material temperature control failure or another condition that may have rendered food unsafe, the food should not be sold or distributed unless a qualified individual determines the condition did not render it unsafe. That United States guidance does not govern the French recall. Different regulatory environment, different event. I am bringing it in because it reinforces an operating boundary. The receiving supervisor owns a leadership and operating problem. The qualified food safety determination belongs with the people, an approved process authorized to make it. And that part matters to me. If you give somebody responsibility for receiving, hold them accountable for the decisions that are legitimately theirs. Did they recognize the exception, protect product status, follow the approved process, keep uncertain product from being treated as released, and communicate what remained unresolved? Those are fair questions. Do not hand them a specialized determination they are not qualified or authorized to make, and then act surprised when they cannot make it. Responsibility and authority have to stay connected. At the same time, quality has it does not mean the dock stopped being yours. Apparently ownership got copied on the email and went home. No, you still have labor, another appointment, transportation coordination, inventory implications, and people waiting for direction. The technical determination and the operating ownership can exist at the same time. That is cleaner leadership. I have made versions of this mistake, and the pattern is attractive for the same reason. You are moving hard toward the objective. You know something is wrong, and you have enough information to feel pressure. So you start treating that pressure like evidence because stopping feels like losing momentum. Then later you find out the small thing you did not resolve was the thing that controlled the whole decision. The lesson I have learned is to respect that boundary. Knowing there is a problem and knowing what to do with the problem are two different thresholds. You can cross the first without crossing the second. Now think about the failure path from another angle. The inbound receiving process depends on sequence. Trailer arrives, documentation and condition are checked, product is received under the approved process, inventory status changes, product becomes available downstream, and orders begin pulling against that availability. Every step assumes the previous step produced information reliable enough to support the next one. The moment receiving releases product, the rest of the operation begins treating that release as information. The WMS does not understand that somebody was uncertain or said it is probably fine. The WMS has never once asked, "Are you sure?" Give it a bad status, and it will distribute that mistake with the confidence of a regional vice president. The system sees status. The downstream picker sees available inventory. Customer operations sees a product position, and another facility may see inbound freight. Once the status changes, the organization starts acting on it. That is why a weak release decision has more consequence than moving a pallet. It changes the information environment around the product. The problem spreads through status. A broad hold changes information too. Product becomes unavailable, planning reacts, orders may be delayed, customer operations changes expectations, and transportation may discuss replacement freight. One receiving decision can change the behavior of several parts of the chain. That is why the missing variable has to be meaningful enough to justify the halt. You are stopping because the answer can materially change what the rest of the system is allowed to believe. Think about the language you hear during these events. It is probably okay. We should reject everything. We need the door. The customer needs the product. Quality will figure it out later. Those statements tell you where pressure exists. They do not resolve the missing variable. The dock door does not get to make the product safety decision. Customer demand, the next appointment, and appearance do not establish exposure scope. You have to separate operating pressure from decision evidence. And does that make sense? Pressure tells you what the cost of waiting may be. Evidence tells you whether the decision is supportable. Both matter, but they are not interchangeable. A deadline tells you how much time you have. It does not tell you whether your assumption is true. A full dock tells you there is capacity pressure. It does not establish the scope of a temperature failure, and that is what in-depth analysis protects. It creates a disciplined halt when continued movement would require the team to pretend it knows something it does not know. And the word discipline matters, because analysis can become its own failure. You can stop everything, request more reports, invite more people, schedule another meeting, build another spreadsheet, and become very busy being analytical while the decision remains exactly where it started. That is not in-depth analysis. That is activity wearing glasses. Every unknown needs to be resolved. Well, not every unknown. The variable that can change the move needs to be resolved. What do I still not know that could make this decision wrong? That question keeps the analysis connected to action. In the refrigerated receiving scenario, you already know normal receiving cannot simply continue unchanged. The missing variable is scope, and that scope has to be established through the approved process and qualified determination. Once it is understood, you return to the problem path with a better basis for action. Maybe the affected material can be isolated. Maybe the concern is broader. The important point is that in-depth analysis is not the destination. It is the point where you recognize the current action path cannot responsibly continue until the missing variable is understood. Then you return to action. That separates it from simple delay. Weak delay sounds like we are not sure, so we are going to wait. Okay. Wait for what? What are we missing? Why does it matter? And what decision changes when the answer comes back? If nobody can answer those questions, you do not have a disciplined halt. You have drift. Nothing is moving. Dock capacity is being consumed. Product status is unclear. Customers and transportation are waiting, and nobody can explain what ends the hold. That is not responsible analysis either. In-depth analysis has to remain attached to the objective. Act too narrowly in uncertain product can move deeper into the chain. Act too broadly in the operation can create unnecessary disruption around unaffected product. The missing scope sits between those two consequences, and that is why the halt is justified. Now connect this lightly to the larger direct action system. CSA matters first because you need a clean read of what is actually happening. The trailer arrived, there is a temperature exception, the receiving schedule is under pressure, product demand exists downstream, the failure is confirmed, and the affected scope is not. Those are different pieces of the operating picture, not one fact. That cleaner read feeds deepen. In this case, in-depth analysis fits because the team has reached a decision boundary and the current information is not sufficient to responsibly choose the next operating move. Pro matters because both directions carry consequence. Move too soon, and you may increase exposure downstream. Stop too broadly, and you may create unnecessary inventory, transportation, customer, and capacity impact. TMC matters because the halt cannot become vague. Receiving, quality, or food safety, transportation, inventory, and customer-facing teams cannot each create their own version of product status. They need the same operating truth about what is confirmed, what is held, what remains unknown, and who owns the qualified determination. The larger system supports the tool. In-depth analysis remains the point. A critical variable is missing. That variable can change the move, and the current action path cannot responsibly continue through that decision point yet. Now bring this into your own logistics environment. Maybe an inventory discrepancy appears before a customer-critical shipment. The system says one quantity and the physical count says another. The immediate question looks like, do we ship? But the variable that matters may be whether the discrepancy is isolated or reflects a broader transaction problem. Maybe a carrier handoff failed. That does not automatically mean reroute every shipment, which freight is actually exposed, or a batch of shipment transactions ran during an outage. Do you rerun all of them? Maybe. But first, which transactions actually completed? Different operating conditions. Same leadership discipline. Do not make the first confirmed failure larger or smaller than the evidence supports. Find the unknown that can change the move. And if you are responsible for a shift, a dock, a work stream, or a customer issue, you are going to run into specialized decisions bigger than your authority. You are not required to possess every specialized answer that enters your operation. You are required to recognize when your operating decision depends on one. If food safety or quality owns the technical disposition, fine. That does not mean you stop managing the door, labor, inventory status, appointment pressure, communication, and downstream consequences inside your responsibility. The technical determination belongs where the expertise and authority sit. The operating ownership stays where the operation is owned. The same logic applies when IT owns technical diagnosis, maintenance owns equipment condition, quality owns a release determination, or compliance owns a specific interpretation. You still have work around the decision. You just do not get to replace missing expertise with confidence. The cold chain example makes that visible because product movement creates consequence quickly. Once questionable product moves, the organization may have to find it again. Once usable product is broadly stopped, the operation may have to rebuild the capacity or customer plan around that decision. The wrong assumption does not stay at the dock, it travels with the freight. I want you to think about the next exception your team gets. Before somebody converts the first signal into a complete conclusion, ask what is actually confirmed, not what everybody believes. What is confirmed, then look at what is still being assumed. What are people repeating that has not actually been established? Now ask the question that matters. What unknown, if wrong, would change the move we are about to make? If the unknown would not change anything, you may not need to stop for it. If it can reverse the decision, expand the consequence, change the affected scope, or make the current action irresponsible, that may justify a diagnostic halt. Then look at the commitment your team is about to make. Are you about to release something, reject something, reroute something, promise a customer something, change inventory status, schedule labor, or move a load? Those commitments are where incomplete reads create downstream consequences. The decision may take 30 seconds. The consequences can live in the operation for days, and keep the responsibilities clean. If the missing variable requires a qualified technical determination, use the qualified process. If you need information you do not possess, get it through the approved path. Do not turn urgency into unauthorized expertise. But do not disappear from the problem either. You still own what remains under your control. That is the balance. You do not need perfect information. You need enough information to resolve the variable that could make the move wrong. That is in-depth analysis at the recognition level. Stop the action path when the missing variable can break the decision. The French recall gives us a useful real-world reminder. There was a cold chain failure. The public notice identified a specific affected pallet, and the notice made clear the entire lot was not affected. The signal was real, the pressure was real, and the consequence was real. But the scope still mattered. And in your operation, you may be the person standing at that exact decision boundary. You know something happened. Action is required, and people are waiting, but the variable that determines the correct move is still unresolved. Do not let the dock decide it for you. Do not let the schedule decide it for you. Do not let customer pressure decide it for you. And do not let somebody's confidence become a substitute for evidence. Resolve the variable that can break the decision, then move again with a stronger read. The cold chain broke. First, find out what was actually exposed. When you are ready to go deeper with in-depth analysis, go to www.direct-action-system.io/course-directory. Open the course directory, find the course connected to in-depth analysis, and deepen and start there. That is where the deeper application belongs. Thanks for listening to the briefing.